The cilia of time, gently stroked, caress the farthest reaches of the senses, carrying the ghost of regularity with them. As one ripple makes us forget the outline of the next ripple, thought always eats away at its own margins. A straight line in name only, in which the stimulus is continuous, is filled with weaves and distortions, pushing the perceptual mail open and inviting a twill in the name of coincidence. Every time I touch the folds of time folded by falling in between, the self repeatedly loses and is distracted from the outline, and I offer my tongue to the innocent silence. Nunoki is never completed. Nunoki is always an escape. The illusion of persistence lays in the crevices of the arrangement. Before words, it is an unnamable tremor. The breath that wets the boundary wears the mask of continuity and is pregnant with the metaphor of intermittence. In the womb of the absence of continuity, which is no longer anyone's intention even to fall into, Ma continues to decay and germinate. At the end of the unnamable arrangement, we reach out our hands as if to touch an unnamable stimulus, to the untouchable. A series of moments devour the slackening gap. The consciousness exposed to the torrent of stimuli while missing eternity still perceives the moment as a continuation. As the moments accumulate, the boundaries blur, the contours of time become saturated, and depth is lost. The dense succession of moments, in turn, erases the blank space, and the MEA loses the art of placement. Silence no longer intervenes, and a structure without margins can only destroy itself. Excessive vibration deprives us of equilibrium, and in a place without equilibrium, reason loses sight of its coordinates. Continuity creates rupture, and stimulation seals the senses. Where should we place the pause? To pierce the deception of continuity, and place the breath of pause there. A piece of glass placed on the edge of the senses. It is so continuous that it tingles, and the murmur of transparent frenzy is set up between the texture and the texture. Each time the equilibrium of breathing is differentiated, the stimulus is transformed into a surplus beyond the self, and the sense of touch claws at the cross-section of thought. If the persistence of sound, which never stops, is placed inside the silence falls into the folds that fill the space between stimulus and stimulus.
Stimulation to fill the gap, it shakes the ratio between paralysis and arousal.
The heat that seeps along the spine of consciousness, the contours of existence redefined with every drop, crumbling with every touch, reinforced with every collapse. Cloth placement is an untouchable temporary glue that temporarily suspends the position of what does not exist. The criticality where persistence turns into continuity, where the pause is not just a blank space, but a fabric that prepares for the generation of stimulus, a scaffold for repetition, a foundation waiting for the call. Falling is not a fall, but the placement of the will to sink. Every time one stimulus ends, the next stimulus is placed. The nameless pauses that lurk in the gaps between the stimuli erode the senses and blot out thought. The continuous stimulation produces an invisible stage of placement of the gaps. It is not the self that falls into the space, but the space itself. The installation of the space in between, which is created by the continuous stimulation, is nothing but an invisible skeleton that supports everything. Stimulation undermines the space between, yet maintains it. It is in this arrangement that infinite creaking is woven into the fabric. The point of equilibrium, which refuses to rest, is always clad in a form of pre-existence and reverses itself into a suspended self-sufficiency. Which stimulus was the first? Which pause comes last? The will to seek order has already fallen into the excess of order. Placement betrays placement, and stimulus blinds stimulus. The senses are stitched even in the margins, and the self is bequeathed to the subtle ataxia of reaction. The placement of stimulus and interstitial, it is a coordinate system of invisible entrapment. The persistence that seeps into the folds of the senses precipitates without being given an end. A chain of nameless fingertips, called stimulation. Even the difference between a gap and a gap collapses, and the starting point and the ending point of touch dissolve. It is not the body that sinks, but the space itself. It is not the arrangement, but the placement, the unmixed particles that are not arranged, but simply deposited vertically. Or, time is the jawbone that crunches the stimulus, the roar of a blank space that can only confirm its own existence through continuous chewing. Not sound, but internal friction before it becomes sound. It is not falling into the space between. The pause itself sinks.